Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I am your host, Apostate Aladdin, and on today's episode of the Aladdin Show, I'm not taking any callers. I'll just be answering a bunch of questions that I received about myself, about the channel, and everything else in between. Yes, because the entire universe exists on a spectrum between my channel and I. So I received a bunch of questions from you in under a community post and on Instagram, and today I'll be attempting to answer as many of them as I can. So let's see how that goes. And before I get that annoying comment saying who asked, well, you guys, you asked. That's why I'm doing this. I thought that was clear. Without further ado, first of all, are we online? Let me know in the comments if we are online. I've been having some technical difficulties sometimes, but I'm assuming we are. So let's see what the first question is. Okay, well, let's randomize them a little bit. Scrolling through. Let's start with this one. How does Allah look like in your imagination when you were still a Muslim? I'm curious about other people's imaginations, since in mine, Allah looks like an angry Indonesian shaman. Even though I'm a religious person, that's why back then I always felt guilty when thinking about what Allah's face looked like. What did I think of Allah's face? I always thought of Allah as a cloud, like a white cloud, and he looked constantly, it was hard to read, like kind of disappointed, kind of calm, kind of like he knows what you did sort of vibe. So I just thought of God as, a big old man cloud face, if that answers the question. Yeah. Let's randomize the questions again. We have about 80 questions today, so let's see how many we can get through. So this person's asking, do you own your cat or does your cat owns you? What, he said anything? I've got two, and I feel like they own me because I can't tell them what to do, but they've trained me to do certain things on command without me even noticing. So I'd say my cats own me. Moving on. Do you believe that society can function without the sense of God and godly rules, aka religion? Yes, I do believe that society can function without religion. I mean, it has been. But then again, no society is perfect. I mean, you can look at societies that function without religion and find out some issues that they have, and you can attribute their success to their, I don't know, like it's a complicated topic. I just don't want people to assume that I'm idolizing societies that are not religious or thinking that they have no issues. But I think we have already examples of societies that do function to some extent without religion. So I hope that answers that question. Moving on. How to deal with internalized misogyny/hatred that Islam has instilled. Let me think about that for a second. Like, is that question coming from a woman who's asking how to deal with internalized misogyny, or is it coming from a man? I'm assuming from the internalized that you are a woman. I'm not a woman, so I can't give you advice for that kind of thing, like self-hatred or self-misogyny. That's not something that I experienced. But I definitely did have misogynistic tendencies, and I don't know if all of them can be attributed to religion, but a chunk of them could be. What's the question again? How to deal with internalized misogyny. The same way you deal with any belief that you have. You inspect it, you think about it critically, you discuss it with other people, you try to play devil's advocate for the other side, you just try to approach it from every angle you could. And once you're done rigorously thinking about it, you will probably leave with a better conclusion than you had before, whatever that belief is, including misogynistic beliefs. So I hope that method works for you. How do you handle depression after becoming ex-Muslim? For example, suicidal thoughts. Oh, that's a heavy one. So I've already made at least one video about this topic. I can't remember the title of the video right now, but I'll try to link it up there. But the gist of it is, it's very difficult. You go through a crisis of, not just a crisis of faith, but of purpose and meaning. So the first thing is identify the source of that depression or the cause of that depression, because it's not always the same. For some people, it's the realization that the entire world is not the way that they imagined it would be and that there's no afterlife. For others, it's just that they know their relationships with family are now going to be hindered by their lack of belief. So it really depends on what is causing your depression. Try to identify that, and that's the first step I can recommend. And please do think before doing anything that will harm you long term. Like, do not seek help if you can, but I know not everyone is in a position to seek help. But my advice would be to not give up hope and don't do anything that you might regret if you live. Yeah, it's difficult, I know, but I've been in that position before, and I can't tell you a formula that works for everyone, but I could tell you that with enough time, it is possible to get past it. All right, let's get to another question. I'm also trying to keep an eye on the live chat. I'm giving priority to the questions that were already submitted, but if I see a question I might want to answer, I could. Like this one, Southern Mysticism asks, I have a question. Why is it that when Muslim apologists clearly see that a lot of ex-Muslims cover their faces for protection, they don't acknowledge it? I think acknowledging it is difficult because it would be like acknowledging that that there is a problem here, or that there could be danger from people who believe against people who leave the religion. Some of them think that that danger is justified because they're stopping, and it's a necessary evil. They're stopping corruption from spreading. And some of them don't agree with it, but they don't want to come out and say it because they don't want to. Just acknowledging the bad thing is bad PR for the religion and for its adherents. So I can understand why they don't want to acknowledge it, but it is something that is a fact that we have to live with. If you're someone who's a critic of the religion, you're in a little bit more, I mean, I'm minimizing here, but you're in a lot more danger than someone who doesn't speak about the religion critically. And that's not just ex-Muslims. Even Muslim reformists or progressive Muslims or Muslims who don't agree with the mainstream tend to get in dangerous situations because of people targeting them. I hope that answers that. All right, let's move on to another question. What do you think about antinatalism and misanthropy? So I don't know very much about them. Like, I haven't read about them in depth, but from what I understand, antinatalism is the belief that humans should not procreate. Correct me if I'm wrong in the live chat, please. I don't have that belief strongly. I don't have any strong beliefs about what other people should do. I mean, the most I'd go is say that some people have more kids than they're able to fully support or love or care for, and that just creates human lives that are going to suffer because the environment is not right for them to grow. And that doesn't mean that only people who are well financially equipped to have a kid should have a kid. I understand that for some it's a drive and it's a struggle that they will figure out as they raise the child. But I'm talking about extreme cases where there are way too many children or the parents are not well equipped at all to handle having a child. I think that people get pressured into becoming parents because that's what you're expected to do by your society, culture, religion, whatever it may be. And I think people would benefit to pause and think about it a bit before making such a huge decision. I personally don't think I ever want to have children because I see how difficult it is for the next generations, and the world is becoming even more populated. I don't think that the world is going to fall apart if I personally don't have a kid. Like, there's plenty of people having children already. So I hope that answers that. And misanthropy, from when I looked it up, I think it just means that you don't like other humans. I don't feel that way. I think that there's a lot of good and bad to humans, and generally we're a fascinating species, so I wouldn't say that I hate humans. So yeah, moving on. Opinion on the Barbie movie. Haven't seen it yet. Just bad timing. What else? Did you feel lonely when you left Islam? Yes, extremely. And I'll tell you why. Even before leaving Islam, for a very, very long time, I felt extremely lonely because I felt like no one else could understand my thoughts. I try to convey them to other Muslims, and it's not that everyone had a negative reaction. Even the ones who had, pleasant conversations with me, I felt like we were worlds apart in our understanding of the world and our understanding of religious reasoning, even. So it was lonely to see that, or to think that there was no one else like me. I wasn't aware of the concept of someone who isn't convinced of a religion and leaves it, at least not Islam. I've heard of people leaving other religions, but it seemed impossible to me that a Muslim would leave Islam. So I thought very negative things of myself. Am I the exception? Am I a bad person for being the exception? But eventually, through finding community, through spending enough time investigating it to reassure myself that it's not just some kind of impulse, it's not some kind of humanistic desire, as believers might put it. After a lot of reassurance and realizing that other people like me exist, it no longer feels lonely. Not to the same extent, at least. All right, so let's keep moving. We have a lot of questions. Hopefully I can get to all of them. But to remind you, before we continue, like the video, the live stream, leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. I appreciate it a lot. Pineapple on pizza, acceptable? Yes, and dare I say sometimes it is fantastic. So it depends on my mood, and it depends on, it's all about consent, right? Like, don't get a Hawaiian pizza with pineapple for everyone to eat, because you don't know if everyone wants pineapple on pizza. It's a very jarring decision. So as long as everyone's into it, yeah, what's wrong with pineapple on pizza? Do you sometimes have doubts about your non-belief? I don't think so. I don't think that I know the answer to the universe, or how we came to be, or what our purpose is, and a lot of these questions that religion sometimes answers or offers answers for. But I don't have doubts that I don't believe in Islam anymore. I used to have these doubts, but they were usually stemming from fear. What if I'm wrong? What if I go to hell? That kind of thing. And that's usually the most common kind of doubt that I hear about. It's not it can be, but most of the time it's not doubting the methodology or doubting your reasons for not believing. It's doubting that you might go to hell. It's just about fear most of the time. I don't have a fear of hell at all. I have a lot of other fears that I'm working on, but not anymore the fear of torture and hell. So I do not have doubts about my non-belief. But that's not to make you feel bad if you do have doubts about your non-belief, even if it's been decades for you. Everyone's different in their journey, and don't take this to mean that there's something wrong with you if you still have doubts about your non-belief. It's very difficult to shake off a belief, especially if you've been conditioned into it, and if everyone around you is still adopting and following that belief. So cut yourself some slack. It takes time. Next question. Would you date a religious person or a Muslim? Do I even separate those two? So no, most of the time I don't think I would date a Muslim person, because it would just cause issues in our relationship one way or another someday. I mean, would they be okay with what I'm doing right now? I've met Muslims who are okay with what I'm doing right now, believe it or not, but it's a whole different story to introduce me to their parents and my in-laws knowing what I do. I just don't have to, I don't want to have to hide who I am or what I believe in just to get along with someone's family members, or someone's or the person themselves. So I find that to be unlikely that I would meet someone who is Muslim and we can have a future together. Like, it might be distressing for them to see me do what I do. And similar thing about a religious person, it's mostly about how our lives mesh together and how well we think, if we clash in the ways that we think. And if someone's religious in a way that doesn't affect my life or theirs negatively at all, and are not bothered by the fact that I'm not religious, and they're not going to make any decisions in life that would affect me or them based on religion, if that makes sense. Like, for example, I don't want to be in a relationship with a religious person who would refuse an organ transplant because their religion says so. That's obviously not the case for everyone, but I'm just trying to give an example. As long as these barriers don't exist, then their religiousness wouldn't bother me. But more often than not, these barriers do exist. So the answer is it's complicated. Probably not, but it's not that I don't respect them because of their beliefs. It's just that I want to minimize any friction in the long term. Yeah. Thank you for the super chat, Gear. That's so generous of you. I appreciate it a lot. This actually ties into one of there are a few questions that I will have to reference this super chat for, but thank you again. Next question is, do you like Star Wars? I have never watched it, and I don't think I ever will. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I feel like it's a bit too late for me. I mean, where I grew up, Star Wars was not a big deal. I don't think we'd even heard of it. It wasn't really on TV. So now it feels like a bit too late to go back and watch, I don't know how many hours of movies and sequels and prequels and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't really appeal to me that much. Yeah. Sure, I'm going to lose a big portion of my fan base over that. I found this question to be very funny. Bro, what is the solution to all of these things happening in the world? I don't know. I definitely don't have the answer to that. I don't have the answer to most things. But I wish I did. And yeah, when I was religious, I had a phase where I felt guilty or responsible for all the bad things happening in the world, or that there are a lot of bad things happening in the world. And I was thinking to myself, why isn't God doing anything about them? Do I even believe that God is there and just standing by, letting free will cause all of this? I didn't know what to think. I was very confused, and I felt like I needed to do something to make the world a better place. And I'm trying to do that now. I can't solve all of the world's problems, but I can try to help people solve some of their own. So that's what I'm trying to do. But I didn't answer your question, how to solve all the world's problems. I've got multiple questions about this topic. Advice for ex-Muslims still living at home, please. Well, one piece of advice would be, don't prioritize coming out before anything else. Prioritize your well-being. So the equation is different for every person. For some people, their well-being includes, or has to include, that they be their true selves and they tell everyone around them that they don't want to adhere to this religion. For others, they don't mind playing along, or maybe the religion doesn't have that much of an effect on their lives, or they can get away with delaying this announcement, or even they don't have to do much to pretend to be Muslim anyway. So it really depends on the person. What matters the most is that you are safe and you're thriving and that you're mentally healthy. So whether you need to tell them and move out, whether you need to just not tell them anything, whether they're going to find out anyway, whether you're okay with acting along, it really depends on who you are. Just don't come out for the sake of coming out. Make sure to weigh your options carefully, is what I would say. And try to not fall into this trap of thinking that if only you tell them your thoughts clearly, if only you communicate with them clearly, they will understand and they'll let you be the way you want to be, and maybe they'll even leave the religion. That is a trap that many of us have fallen into, thinking that if only my parents knew the truth, or my family members knew the truth, if only they've seen this verse or that translation or that. Usually that doesn't do the trick. Of course, every family is different, and you should know your family better than I would know it. So just be careful and look out for yourself first and foremost, is my advice. All right, moving on. What are the satanic verses and its implications on the reliability of Quranic revelations? So don't quote me on this. I didn't prepare references for this, but if you look it up, you'll find them very easily. I think it was a time where Muhammad said a couple of verses about Allat wal Uzza, about the gods or the idols of or goddesses of the polytheists around him, and he said a verse that meant something like تلك الغرانيق العلا, I think, and شفاعتهن something about acknowledging these goddesses as goddesses. And apparently everyone around him, the believers, were shocked and upset because he said shirk, polytheism, or worshipping any god besides Allah, is the worst of sins. Like, it's unforgivable almost. And he took it back and he said, well, that was the shaitan that made me say that verse. It wasn't actually a revelation from Gabriel, Jibreel. I thought it was, but turns out the shaitan was trying to mess with my head. I think it's laughable for many reasons, because how do you even know what's Jibreel and what's not if it's all inside your head? I mean, if you don't have secondary sources to verify what's happening, I don't know. I don't know how he didn't, or these prophets, I don't know how they trust their sanity in any of this. I don't know what actually happened back then. My hypothesis would be that perhaps he was, I don't know, kind of losing his mind and he said it, or perhaps he was trying to get the polytheists on his side by appealing to their gods and saying, hey, we acknowledge your gods too, and then realizing that the backlash was not worth it. Perhaps he genuinely believes that shaitan told him to say that verse and then took it back, but it's just silly, and it highlights the silliness of the whole method of transmission. Is God limited to only talking to one guy at a time in some cave far away from everyone in a way that could be misconstrued as insanity or the devil or something? We have secure messages these days. We have ways of securing communication way better than Allah ever did. Why are we relying on he said, she said, and yeah, I thought it was the devil? It's just a very silly thing to me. And there are people who took issue with it because then they started thinking, I mean, even after the Prophet's death, how do we know what came from shaitan and what didn't by that logic? Another question. What music/songs make you cry? Depends on my mood, doesn't it? I think it's if the lyrics pertain to something I am going through or have gone through or something sentimental to me, then that's usually when I would cry. But I don't think music has that effect on me very much. Some movies do, though, but music, not as much. Another question. Do you find yourself wanting to find or to be a part of a non-religious spiritual community? That depends on what you mean by spiritual. Again, depends on how the person defines spiritual. I found myself wanting to be part of a community, a non-religious community, yes, and I'm trying to build one of my own. As I've said before many times on this channel, if you become a patron or YouTube member and link your Discord account to the platform, you will join my Discord server. And right now we have about 100 members. Most of them are, or a lot of them are active members. So if you would like to be part of that community, check it out. So yeah, I am trying to build a community to be a part of because I couldn't find one for the longest time. But spiritual specifically, not really. Though it's nice to hear from people what they think about life, and I guess it's nice to have philosophical discussions, but I don't know if that counts as spirituality. So, hope that answers that. If you could go back in time and talk to yourself when you were still a questioning Muslim, what advice would you give yourself? That depends. I feel like I wouldn't do anything differently, because if I change anything about the trajectory of my journey, I don't know if I'd be here today. Like, say I gave myself some very good advice and that meant that I wouldn't be in a state of confusion for as long as I was, then who knows if I would start this channel eventually. So the first answer I have is I would not go back in time and talk to myself and tell myself anything, because I'm glad I am exactly where I am today. But if I'm looking at this in a less pedantic sort of way, if I could talk to myself as a questioning Muslim, what advice would I give myself? to trust my intellect and do the opposite of what a lot of apologists want us to do, which is not to trust our intellect and tell us that it might be the devil or it might be insanity or it might be temptation or whatever it might be. Ignore all that. Just ignore the apologists, go to the source material, talk with other people, and trust your intellect. That would be my advice. What are some great ex-Muslim groups to join? Well, I'm only going to recommend mine, like I said. Join the Discord server by becoming a patron or YouTube member. And the reason I don't recommend any other ex-Muslim groups is because I am not active in any of them, so I don't want to give a bad recommendation. I'm not even aware of most of them. So yeah, my answer is my Discord group or our community. Okay, another question. What are your thoughts on spirituality? So kind of related to a previous question. I don't know what spirituality means. I think that sometimes when people say spirituality, what they're referring to is a personification of or a more digestible explanation of how our minds work or how we think of ourselves. So someone might put labels on it and call it your soul and say enriching your soul by doing this and that, or and they might be right, but not because they're describing some kind of metaphysical soul that you have. It might all just be about your brain chemistry, but they found ways to phrase it that are more simple to understand and more personified. So I think there's benefit in spirituality. If it works for you, it works for you. At the end of the day, the most important thing is living a good life and not harming the people around you or yourself. So if you manage to do that through some version of spirituality, more power to you. I might be spiritual in a way that I don't recognize. I don't know. Do you speak any other languages besides English and Arabic? And if you were to choose a language to learn at some point in your life, what would you pick? English and Arabic are my main languages that I can speak and write. I am trying to very slowly learn Spanish and French on Duolingo mostly. So yeah, I don't think I have plans on to learn any other language. So if I can someday master Spanish and French, I'll be very happy. And I like learning phrases from every language that I can tell people randomly to give them the impression that I know how to speak the language, especially if I can pronounce it correctly. Love doing that. Okay, what do you think of forced hijabs? Obviously, I do not like forced hijabs, and I also don't like forcing people out of the hijab, but I'll focus on the question itself. I think it's terrible. I think the hijab itself as a concept is usually harmful to the woman. And hear me out. You know, I'm again, to make it clear, I don't advocate for forcing people in or out of the hijab. But I think the concept of shaming a woman for having hair and just having hair, the terminology that people use is usually showing her hair, but she's not showing her hair any more than I am showing my eyes right now. I mean, it's not something that is expected to be hidden or has any benefit from hiding it or harm from showing it. It's just hair. God allegedly created her with hair. Why would he then go and say, well, you have to hide it except from your husband? Or just instilling the idea in the woman from a very young age that it's protection for her, when we've clearly seen that sexual harassment is not deterred in any way by a woman wearing a hijab or a niqab or anything of the sort. In fact, it might actually blame the victims more and cause more harm that is hidden up. But that's besides the point. What was the question again? What do you think of forced hijabs? I think it's sad that it can turn women's ideas of themselves in a way to such a degree that some ex-Muslim women or women who don't necessarily even care for their religion feel uncomfortable not wearing the hijab. They feel like they're doing something wrong just feeling the breeze in their hair. That feels like a crime. And I don't think that's justified. some people think that it's trivial, like you just wear the hijab, so what? I did it, my mom did it, all that kind of stuff. But you don't have any idea how much of an effect it has on some people just to be against their will put into something or out of it. So, yeah, I am very anti forced hijab. What are your favorite indoor plant species, as you seem to have quite a few? To be honest, my favorite indoor plant species is whatever I can find for free, pretty much. Most of the plants that I have are either cuttings from other plants or a plant that someone was throwing away or something. So I don't really have a huge preference on species. And mostly it's been, I suppose, the pothos plant behind me. I have multiple of them, but they're all dying at the same time, and I don't know what to do. I've repotted one of them. That wasn't the issue. I'm gonna add more fertilizer and more water. I don't know, but hopefully they can survive through the season. But yeah, I suppose that is my favorite plant just because of how many leaves can grow out of one pot. That's a good time to answer cat questions. Have you ever entertained becoming a cat man, aka owning tons of cats? No, I have two, and that's plenty for me. Actually, I kind of wish I just had one, but I have two, and I love them both. But I would not have more than two. Too much cat hair, too much like too high of a vet bill, and they have different food requirements and different personalities, and they annoy me in different ways. But again, I love both of them. I just wouldn't have more than two cats. I mean, maybe if my partner has a cat, then sure, it might be three, but yeah, that three is as most as I would have with another person. What is your view on the role of Islam in the oppression of women? People say Islam is feminist. Um, I always hear this Muslims saying Islam is feminist because it gives maybe the bare minimum rights that they allegedly didn't have in the days before Islam. I don't know how verifiable it is that women had such bad lives before Islam in that region, but even if it were true, I don't think we should give credit to Islam for doing the bare minimum and then doing a lot of things wrong. Uh, it's, again, like the analogy that I've given before, it's like praising Henry Ford for having the first mass-produced car, the Model T, and then driving it around today. Like, why would you drive that car around today? There's so many better things to do. So sure, it was better than walking back then, but now you have a lot of other options. So I see Islam as if it gave women any rights, it's better than a shitty situation they were in, but it doesn't mean that it's a golden standard for what a woman's rights would look like. I mean, for God's sake, just to give one example aside from the usual ones that we know of, if a man wants to divorce his wife in Islam, he could just literally say, talaq, you are divorced, and that's it. If a woman wants to divorce a man, she has to go to a judge and like file an appeal. Basically, my husband is not a good husband because of so and so, and like she has to make her case and hope that the judge allows her to separate from that man. But the man can choose whenever he wants talaq, and it goes way beyond that. But that's just to give you one example of how Islam paints women as hysterical creatures who can't make their own decisions. They can't decide on a marriage. They can't decide to end a marriage because she might be too hysterical in the moment. We can't trust her with that much power. But the guy, he can say talaq whenever he wants. So Islam is not a feminist religion by any stretch of the imagination. And I keep bringing examples in every other video about how Muhammad himself treated his wives in very odd, bizarre ways. Like allowing one of his wives, Sauda, to give up some of her rights because Muhammad wants to spend more time with his child bride. Like he explicitly has a favorite in one of his 11 wives, and she didn't want to be, like the older wife, didn't want to be left out on the street, didn't want to be divorced. So she volunteered her night with him so that he can spend it with his younger child bride. And he went and made it a law in Islam. Is that feminism? Is that how you treat, like, forget genders for a second. Is that how you treat a partner? So Yeah, no, I get a little bit worked up about this. Islam is not feminist in any way. Okay, maybe irrelevant, but any book recommendations, any topic. Another question was, what's your favorite book? It's very difficult for me to make lists and, on the spot, remember what are my top books and all that, and then rank them. So I can never answer what's your favorite, whatever. But I can tell you the last book that I read. It was a science fiction novel called Sea of Tranquility. I can't remember the author's name. Something ended with Saint John Mandel or something. It's a very interesting book about time and memories, and that's all I'm going to say to not spoil it. So I do recommend that you read it. Do you have a girlfriend? Well, do I have a partner? That the time of you viewing this live stream, the answer would depend. So as of right now, I don't, but by the time you're seeing this, Allahu Alam. So why and when did you get your cats, if you can say? So I got them right before, early 2020, right before the virus. And I've wanted a cat for a long time, and I was at a point in my life where I was ready to adopt a cat. And I adopted them from a foster shelter situation. And I at first I just wanted one cat, but then I thought about it. If I go out for work every day from 9 to 5, would a kitten at home by itself be okay? Like, wouldn't it be bored? And I felt very bad just getting one cat. It felt cruel to me. So I got these two, and they're siblings from the same litter. So it was perfect. And then the virus happened just like almost immediately. And I ended up spending almost all my time around these cats. And now they're both very, very attached. And I have too many cats. I wish I just had one, but I love them both. Do you play any instruments? No, I do not. I bought a piano keyboard thing so I can... Please don't show your butt on screen. That's not very nice. I bought a piano keyboard thing so I can learn on it, but I haven't touched it in months. So I do not play any instruments, unfortunately. All right, let's move on to a different kind of question. Do you plan on removing your mask, maybe in the future, if it becomes safer to become a public ex-Muslim? I completely understand it's for safety. I am a closeted ex-Muslim myself. I don't plan on it. I mean, I hope it never happens against my will. I don't think I would voluntarily do it. Just aside from safety, is I don't like the feeling that someone might recognize me when I'm walking around and I'm not paying attention. I mean, especially because of the safety thing. But just in general, I don't want to be on edge every time I go outside. But I feel like if I need to play a bigger role that feels more mainstream, that feels more public facing than I currently do, I might be forced to be in that position where I have to be public about who I am. And if there's enough benefit in that, and if I can ensure my safety somehow and the safety of the people I care about, then I might, but very unlikely to happen. Another question: how do you overcome the feeling of guilt when leaving your family? So I guess that's related to the questions about how do you behave as a closeted ex-Muslim, or say I took that step, now what do I do? What do I do with my life? A lot of us feel very guilty that though we're definitely not trying to harm our families by leaving, sometimes it's even forced on us, and sometimes we realize that we don't fit in and we cannot just keep breaking their hearts, or feel like we're breaking their hearts by refusing to live the way that they live. It's difficult. It's different for everyone, but I would just remind you to think of the facts. Think of how just because your parents raised you and possibly loved you and provided for you does not mean that they're entitled to you pretending to be your inauthentic self for the rest of your life just to please them, or the rest of their lives. Because they would want you to be happy, and you cannot be happy if you are just pretending to them. And say you're out and they're not happy about that and you feel guilty. Just remind yourself that you're not doing anything to harm them. You're just simply trying to survive. And if you could minimize the harm, you would. And I assume that most people who relate to this have tried to minimize the harm that comes from leaving religion, the harm to their family members even. It's not your fault that they're in that position. It's not your fault that they're not happy about who you are. Just try to remind yourself of that. I hope that helps. And maybe being in touch with other people in a similar situation might help support you and remind you that it's not your fault. All right. What do you see the ex-Muslim community to be like in 20 years in the West, in Muslim countries, and worldwide? I don't have a good prediction. I could tell you what I hope to see. I hope that it becomes, in 20 years or so, probably not, but I hope that it becomes not a big deal to leave religion. That, as it already happens in some circles on a limited scale, that people don't care whether you pray or not, whether you believe or not. And that is hard to imagine without imagining that the believers are also lower in terms of their adherence to their faith. But if there's a way for that to happen, like people can still continue their faith and completely allow people who don't believe to leave it and not have to act like they believe, that would be fantastic. That's what I hope for. So I don't know where it's going to be in 20 years, but I hope that it's at a position where we don't need to hide anymore. Well, I want to thank you, Hamza, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Hamza asks a good question, kind of related to the previous one. What is your ideal outcome from this channel in the next few years? I'll tell you very honestly, I don't like how ex-Muslims are represented by the loudest voices. And that's part of why I started this channel. Ideally, I would overtake a lot of these voices or give a voice to everyone else who's not represented by those people. Ideally, this channel, this community would grow a lot in popularity. And it's not just about this community and similar communities, and a lot of other, like I want a variety of ex-Muslim voices to be heard, not just the one or two popular people that always feud with, the Muslim side. So I hope that is the ideal outcome, that this kind of movement gains a lot of traction and this kind of representation gains a lot of traction. And I guess a variation of that question in the next 5 years, I'm already achieving what I'm trying to achieve. Like everything that people tell me that my channel is doing for them, the ways that it's helping, that's already happening. I just hope that it would happen at a larger scale. And maybe someday, ultimately, if I can actually fund it somehow. I mean, and another goal is to be able to sustain this for more than a year, because to be honest with you, the way that this is headed, I don't think I'm able to do this full time for much longer, unless something changes. I'm working on it, but it's very difficult. So ideally, not only would this be sustainable for me, would I be able to not just survive, but also, again, like start to contribute to my savings account. I've been, withdrawing it dry lately. Ideally, I would also start organization that can help people in more ways than just listening to one guy talk on a video. I would fund therapy for people who need it. I would fund escape for people who are in dire situations and need to not be in that community or that country even anymore. Ideally, I would start an organization that can help with those sorts of things. But I know that these organizations already exist. I don't know how, but I hope to someday get a lot more funding for that kind of project. So I suppose those are my goals. Okay, another question. Do you think it's better to support progressive interpretations of Islam or to just explain to people why Islam is wrong? I feel like people would rather support something they know is backwards that Islam approves of than something they know would improve society but is seen as haram, like women's rights activists who are Muslim. No, I cannot support progressive Islam personally, as in I would not come out and make a video telling you as a progressive Muslim what to believe or how it has some validity or anything like that, because I don't believe in it, not even one bit. But I don't want to make videos just specifically tearing down progressive Islam unless it gets in the way of people who are struggling getting help. So what I don't like about progressive Islam is it seems to be sort of a band-aid. Like once we gain some traction and attention for those who are struggling under Islam, you hear a progressive voice saying, well, that's just a bad interpretation of Islam. Real Islam is very pretty and beautiful and blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly no one's paying attention anymore. Like the problem's been solved, but it hasn't been. So I don't think that progressive Islam has much of a leg to stand on scripture, like from a scripture point of view. I think they struggle a lot, and there's a lot of reinterpretation that if it was possible to take that mainstream, it would have happened already. I don't think it's ever possible to have a progressive mainstream Islam. So that's why I'm wary of it. I don't go out of my way to oppose it, though. I think it's better to explain to people why we're struggling under Islam and what we see wrong with Islam. If they want to explain it away with progressivism and reinterpretation and keep their faith, that's their prerogative. But as long as they don't get in the way of the voices who are critical of the religion itself. So, yeah, I think it's better for people to reassess what they believe in, and as long as their conclusion makes them a better person, and as long as their conclusion reduces harm for them and the people around them, then I'm happy, whatever that looks like. Okay, another question. Do you think it's possible for the hijab to be empowering? It's definitely possible. This is related to what I was saying before. If you condition someone to feel a certain way about their body, their hair, about how they're viewed in society. If you live in a society that will mistreat you for not wearing the hijab, or that will objectify you and maybe objectify you a little bit less if you're wearing a hijab, then you might feel empowered by the hijab. Or you might have personal reasons. Like I've seen a lot of justifications that say, I was very insecure about my hair, or I'm not happy with the way I look, but then I wear the hijab and that's not a problem anymore, and it's very empowering to me that way. That could be empowering, but it's also not the healthiest way to deal with the issue. But there are other situations where there's nothing explicitly wrong with the person or their society, but they feel a certain sense of solidarity or identity from the hijab, and it makes them feel empowered. It's not my place to tell them it's not empowering to them, but it is important to remind them that they should stop shouting over people who say the hijab is not empowering to me, I don't want to wear it. That's where it's tone deaf. When you have women talking about their experience with the hijab and it's not favorable, and then you have the Muslim women saying, but it's empowering to me. It's very empowering to me. The hijab is an empowering thing. Sure, but it's not your time to talk about it. You want to talk about how empowering it is, just let the people who aren't happy with it also share their take on it. So that's what I think. Have you ever tried Islamic calligraphy as art when you were a Muslim? Did you feel some inner connection with it? No, because I have very terrible handwriting and I cannot easily draw. Like I used to trace things when I was younger, um, like cars, buildings, maybe even some calligraphy, but it never really. I'm not that kind of artistic person, so it never resonated with me. So yeah, I don't have a connection with calligraphy. What hobbies make you happy? That's a good question. Lately, it's been really difficult because I spend most of my time working on stuff for the channel, or I've been spending a lot of time on the Discord server cultivating this community. Not that I'm the only one doing any work or anything, but I've found that it's nice to do activities with people in my community. So I found less and less time for hobbies these days. One hobby that I used to have but not anymore is like cycling in general, and fixing bikes and buying bikes and things of that nature. or in that field. And reading is also a hobby that I enjoy a lot. But and I briefly got into playing with yo-yos, but then I forgot that I own one. So a lot of my hobbies I pick up and then I drop after a couple of months or less. So for the time being, reading is the hobby that takes most of my time if I'm not working. What do you think about evolution? Evolution was not a big part of, or any part of, my lack of belief. I grew up in a world where no one talked about evolution whatsoever. So it wasn't really in the back of my mind or anything. And then when I learned about it, I thought, well, God could have been talking metaphorically about creation and all that. And it's like God created the mechanism of evolution. Sure, that none of that really gets in the way of my belief, I suppose. But now I could tell you that I've tried to understand evolution and I can see the evidence for it. I struggle with the part of the beginning, how life went from, or how it went from like a primordial soup to self-replicating molecules to life, like DNA, RNA. That is a part that I struggle with, and I don't think that scientists have been able to replicate the conditions to cause that jump yet. But I'd be curious to know once they do. I don't have any strong opinions on evolution. I think the science seems to make sense. I just struggle with the first part of it, or I don't even know if that's considered part of evolution at that point. But yeah, for a lot of people, it plays a big role in their faith. It never did in mine. We've already answered that question. If you could only watch one TV show for the rest of your life, which would it be? I don't like that question because anything that you watch for the rest of your life, you're going to end up hating. But I could tell you that the TV show that I watch most of the time when I'm just trying to relax or fall asleep or do something else is The Office. Don't hate me for being basic, but it's just so easy to watch that show. What do you think? Oh, we've already answered that question. What's your opinion on qadr? So that is fate or predestination in Islam. It was one of the things that got me questioning Islam altogether. And what I think is it does not make sense, predestination and free will coexisting. But more than that, why does Allah care? Like, if it is predestined, if everything is, God wrote everything down as it's going to happen, whether he knew it or decided it or whichever side of the narrative you take, why does he care so much? That part I struggle with so hard. If I knew something was coming and I had the entirety of time, like the concept of time itself, God knew what was going to happen or decided what was going to happen, whichever way you think of it, since before time existed. If I had time to prepare for bad news, that some creations I made are not going to follow me the way that I want, why would I be so hell-bent on getting revenge after the event happens? Like, I knew this was going to come. So it doesn't make any sense to me how Allah could be so passionate about worship that he expected to come or expected not to come, and then so angry when it doesn't happen. And yeah, that's all I have to say. It just does not make sense. It could be possible that predestination is real, but God's feelings about things happening don't make sense given predestination. Like, my brother in Christ, you decided this. What do you think happens after dying? I don't know. Absolutely, I don't know. But I can tell you what I would hope would happen after dying. So I had a lot of issues with the idea of heaven and hell being eternal, and how do you take away someone's desire to do wrong things in hell without taking away their entire personality? None of it really made sense to me. So I can give you an idea of heaven that I find appealing, and it's just that when you die, you get to browse all of your life's moments, and you get to relive them, like not to change anything about them, but you get to re-experience them. You get to enjoy being alive again and again for as long as you want, for any moment in your life, till you've had your fill, till you feel satisfied that you've actually lived this life to its fullest potential, that you've enjoyed it for, that is the heaven, I suppose, that you've enjoyed it for as many times as you can, and then you just cease to exist. That would be my idea of a good thing to happen after life is over. But I don't think anyone knows what happens after dying. But that's not the same as saying, well, someone's hypothesis about the afterlife is just as valid as nothing happening after we die. It doesn't mean that everyone's theory is valid just because we don't know. I mean, wait a second. Or maybe it does, but it's just as ridiculous as saying when we die, we become a phone app. Like you can just say anything nonsensical and it's just as plausible as heaven and hell. So I think that from what we can see, there's nothing special that should happen after we die, but we like to add meaning and fantasy to our lives to enrich them. Any philosopher you like and why? 3 quotes or proverbs you like. No, I do read a little bit of philosophy, but not enough to have a favorite philosopher or favorite quote. I'm sorry to tell you that. My memory is not very good in general, so I don't retain a lot of it in categories or in remembering which philosopher said what. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. How has your perspective on free will versus determinism evolved? I don't know if I can answer how it evolved, because in the past it was just confusion. How can we have free will, but also everything's predetermined or known by God? But now I don't believe we have free will. I really do not believe we do. I think we have some semblance of will, which is the attempts to shape and direct our streams of thought, but we don't have free will in the sense that we have actual control over who we are or how we think or what we believe or what decisions we make. I think all of that is determined to a large degree, or not necessarily determined, but influenced to a large degree by our experiences, by chemistry, by biology, by things that are beyond our control. So I don't think anyone has free will. I don't know if it's completely deterministic either, but we can never know. And as long as we don't have a mechanism of predicting, of doing the math and knowing deterministically what's going to happen next, it's an illusion to us that we have free will. So we might as well live in that illusion. So yeah, I don't think we have free will. We have some semblance of will. And even if the world was deterministic, we will never know. So let's behave as if we do have free will. That's my take. How has the way you approach the concept of meaning and purpose in life, if any, changed? Of course, it's changed a lot. So let me think. I was confused about the meaning of life. I mean, I knew the religious narrative that you do everything you can to please God and be a good person and all that kind of stuff. But the point of life is it's a test for the afterlife. That was the main point of life. And there was an incongruence between the way that people were living and the way that they believed in the afterlife. And I don't just mean Muslims who weren't amazing Muslims and just ignored some parts of the religion. I mean, just in general, if you genuinely believed in the horrific reality that Islam and other religions describe, then why wouldn't you spend every moment of your day begging God for mercy, doing all the good deeds? Like I saw the so-called extremists, or what's another word for it? The fundamentalists, and the people who take things literally and take things a bit too far, a bit too seriously. I thought they had a point. If you truly understood the magnitude and the horrors of the afterlife, just the potential of going to hell, why wouldn't you behave like nothing matters on earth except what God says and except following God's rules? So I was just confused because I saw people not living that way. Most people didn't. And I couldn't get myself to live that way because I wasn't sure if I believe in that narrative. So Now, the meaning and purpose in life, I struggled with that after leaving religion as well. I don't think that there's an inherent meaning or purpose in life, not any more than a tree growing in a wet, I don't know, pond or marsh or something. We just exist, and what we make of it is what matters. So I don't think there's some God given or fundamentally truthful meaning of life. Based on how we've evolved, based on how societies have come to be, and how social animals survived and the ones who weren't maybe didn't survive as well, and by animals I mean humans, I think that I am conditioned to be a social human and derive meaning through social connections. Um, I found meaning and purpose in helping people and in enjoying my life. And that is, that's almost a trigger word right there, enjoying my life or enjoying life. Because as a Muslim, I was taught that this concept of a worldly life that you enjoy is a temptation. No, I'm not saying Muslims don't enjoy life at all, but the idea that life is about enjoyment and there's no deeper meaning is very scary, because that's exactly what we were told as Muslims is the distraction, that shaitan is going to try to make you enjoy life so much that you forget about the afterlife. And so it's scary for me to even, as an ex-Muslim, tell people, yeah, enjoying life is one of my purposes, because immediately I think of this caricature of a person who's just living life just for enjoyment to a hedonistic degree. Basically, what they describe heaven to be, like it's not shameful to enjoy your life in heaven, just having pleasures, no deeper meaning, no struggle, no no dilemmas, just being a happy dopamine filled human shell of a human. That is fine, but enjoying life here sounds dangerous, like a distraction, like it's getting you away from God. So yeah, I'm not a hedonist, but I definitely want to enjoy life, and I think that's part of the purpose that I made for my life. I exist. I never chose to exist, but I'm already here. So helping people, making the world a better place, and enjoying life at the same time, that is where I find meaning and purpose. How often do you think about the Roman Empire? Never. Yeah, I don't get the meme. I never think about the Roman Empire. I do have an interest in old technology, like this book right here. Hopefully some of what's in here will make it into a video very soon. But this book about ancient Greek technology, ancient Greek ingenuity, it's not Roman, it's Greek, but I guess that's as close as I came to thinking about the Roman Empire. Do you experience guilt for leaving Islam primarily with regards to family and relationships? I think we kind of addressed that one before. And yeah, I did, and sometimes I still do, but it's good to remind myself that I've always done the best I could to minimize harm. So even if I think that something might have hurt someone, like me leaving the religion or telling my family that I left religion, even if that hurts them, I did it with the best of intentions for myself and for other people. So, yeah. Let's see, another question. What made you realize Islam is flawed? Again, it wasn't one thing. It was over... I've answered this question a lot, but it always keeps popping up. My entire life, I felt like something was off. I mean, of course, when I was younger, there were times where I just did not question anything, but most of the time I had follow-up questions like, why? Why did God do this? Why did, not just why did God do this, but why does the Quran phrase this thing as if it's amazing? Like, to give you one minor example, and I'm not quoting the story correctly, but Sulaiman, the prophet, and his attempts to impress Malikat Balqis, what was her name? His attempts to impress the queen or the ruler of some land to make her join Islam, and he just had his jinn like create a building of glass that she thought was water when she stepped in. Like, he was basically impressing her by his control of the jinn. And I thought to myself at the time, what? Like, she's joining Islam because this guy can do magic, basically, can control jinn. But couldn't other people also control jinn? Is it just because he can control jinn better than other people, therefore he's a messenger from God? Like, none of the story actually, it's not like he showed her evidence that God is real and explained to her why following God would be a good thing. It's just a pissing contest. Like, here, I can control jinn very well, and look how much stuff I have because I'm such a great ruler because God gave it to me. Like, there are a lot of little things like that that didn't quite make sense to me, but I felt like there was something wrong with me. Like, I was misunderstanding. I don't know exactly how or when that switch flipped and I realized the flaw wasn't with me, it was with the story. But eventually it did. And it was just an accumulation of a lot of stories and a lot of concepts in religion that I thought, okay, that doesn't quite make sense, but I'll let it slip. And then when the switch flipped, I realized, oh, I wasn't wrong. Like, there's something weird about that story. So it's not just one thing, but like I said many times before, a big part was predestination and free will. If God knows everything and God wrote everything that's going to happen, why is he so mad about it all the time? And why is he dooming a lot of people to hell who he knew he would create an environment and with beliefs that will doom them to hell? Again, I keep revisiting this as trying to put myself in God's position. And I know Muslims say, well, you can't. You're a human. You can't understand God. Well, whose fault is that? He created me this way. But I would think to myself, if I was God, if I was behind this, what is essentially a giant simulation that I designed, knowing what the results will be, why would I be pissed off at the subject of the simulation that I created? It doesn't make any sense. So yeah, lots of things. According to you, ex-Muslim converts are a small or big part of the ex-Muslim community. Are they somewhat active? According to me, and this is by no means representative or, a large enough sample size, but I've come across plenty of ex-convert ex-Muslims. Some of them who lived in countries where Muslims were the majority, and some of them who didn't. Like, they lived in the secular world and they were attracted to Islam one way or another. So I've come across more than I thought I would. So a lot. Again, I don't know what that says about the overall numbers, but I know for a fact that every time someone joins Islam, you hear a whole big deal about it. And you see a lot of these videos like, this white guy converts to Islam after 5 minutes with this sheikh and all that kind of stuff. And there's a huge emphasis on converts, especially. There's a racial component to it too, for some reason. But you never hear about their struggles. You're never going to have a video that says, 50% of our converts this year have left or anything like that. It's never talked about. So you don't actually know how many converts leave the religion. And I suspect the number is, very high, almost most of them. But again, I don't have the numbers. It's just based on my experience with it. But I have met converts who remain in the religion. That's not uncommon either. It's just that you don't hear about the ones who leave. How can we avoid being anti-Muslim instead of anti-Islam when Muslims are becoming more radicalized daily? In my opinion, Islam now is the biggest threat to the Western world, and tough actions must be taken for everyone's safety from Islam. I disagree that it's the biggest threat to the Western world. And this is coming from someone who would be a target of radicalized Islam if it gains power. I think it's hard to actually gauge or list what are the problems facing the Western world. What does it even mean, like Western world? Which countries are we talking about? Because every country has unique problems. Heck, every city has unique problems. Every neighborhood does. I think it's a gross generalization to say, and by gross I mean large, to say that Islam, radical Islam, is the biggest threat facing the West. No, it's an attractive news headline worthy threat. I'm not saying it's not a threat at all, or that Islam doesn't affect people negatively in the West. But most of the victims of Islam in the West are Muslims themselves or ex-Muslims. It's not as big of a problem that's affecting non-Muslims. Of course, in some regions it might, but those headlines seem very appealing to generalize to the entire West, whatever that means. I don't think that's true. Like Islam's problem, France's problem with Islam is different than the US having problems with Islam or radical Islam. So yeah, I can't say that it's the biggest threat to the Western world. How could we avoid being anti-Muslim instead of anti-Islam? I think you have to take it on an individual level. And I try to remind myself of that all the time. Even though I see the worst of Islam all the time, because of having this channel, I see a lot of bad examples constantly. I still try to remind myself that despite the source material being very problematic, a lot of people genuinely don't know, or even the people who have bad beliefs, it's not because they're bad people, they're just conditioned that way, or it's just a result of what comes with belief. So I try to cut people some slack and talk to them on an individual level and always assume the best intentions. Because at the end of the day, even people who are so strict in their belief, or even maybe possibly outwardly hateful in the way that they practice their religion, usually they're not doing it because they're bad people or because they love to hate. They're doing it because they think they're doing the right thing. They think that they're standing up for what's right. And if you just try to talk to them further and try to understand why you both have a different idea of what the right thing is, or what the moral good thing is, maybe you'll get somewhere. I hope I'm answering that question. It's a tricky one to answer, and I hope that I'm also demonstrating. Like, for example, I have a lot of call-in shows where Muslims themselves would call in and talk to me, and you see a lot of comments saying, well, that was a very nice person. I didn't expect that from a Muslim. And I say, well, then change your expectations. So representation of all voices of Muslims. So yeah, bit of a tangent. Maybe not. I think one problem with radical Islam gaining traction is that moderates, or those who disagree with some position, some Islamic position or another, are less likely to say something about it because they're worried about their surroundings. They're worried about the people around them thinking they're a kafir, for example, when they just want to criticize this one thing. So maybe hearing them out, the people who have disagreements and still remain Muslim, don't just dismiss them because they're believers. Hear them out and maybe amplify their voices too. What hope do you have in the younger generation of children born into a Muslim family openly questioning Islam? My hope is that they have a larger access to information, or easier access to information than we did. And thankfully, because of the internet and globalization, usually that's been the case. By the way, thank you for the Kickno. Thanks for gifting a bunch of people memberships. That's really nice of you. Appreciate it. Thanks again. So to go back to the question, I hope that they have more sources of information and more exposure to different opinions. That's one thing that I was lacking in my life, is meeting or hearing of or knowing of the existence of an ex-Muslim or someone who had a similar background to mine but doesn't have the same beliefs to mine. They were just kept in the shadows, or we were told stories about them, about what their motivations were, but we never actually heard from them. So hopefully more representation of people like myself would help those younger generations more fairly assess the world and see that what they're told about those who leave the religion or who don't believe are what they're told is not necessarily true. So yeah, more of what I'm doing, I suppose. Hopefully that helps younger generations. Do you think Europe will become Islamic State in another 50 years? No, I don't. I don't. But that's not to dismiss that there are some local issues with Muslim communities and non-Muslim communities, but I don't think that Europe is going to become an Islamic State. Yeah. That was a confusing question. I'd like to hear about those YouTube videos of people who allegedly were turned into beasts as punishment from Allah due to them messing with the Quran. I heard those stories a lot. I'm not sure exactly what the question means, but when I was younger, I heard a lot of these stories about Allah getting mad at someone, or someone challenging Allah and saying, if Allah doesn't turn me into a cat or a donkey or whatever by the end of the day, then Allah's not there. And then they turn into that thing and blah, blah, blah. And I just knew that these stories were bullshit. Even as a Muslim, I thought, come on, like, stop bullshitting us. Um, and I think it was during the age of new Photoshop, when Photoshop was just new, and these things would go out in like chain mail, and that was before WhatsApp. They would just send these creatures that look somewhat human, or maybe deformed humans, or maybe photoshopped human and animal hybrids, and say, well, that's the person in that story who was changed into an animal as punishment. I don't think any of that happened. And it's sad to see people believe that kind of thing. But is it really that far from the belief that God turned sticks into snakes and whatever other thing that the prophets did? It's the same thing, except now we think it's ridiculous because we don't actually see it happening around us. We have documentation of such instances if they happen, which they don't. But it's somehow not ridiculous to believe that the same exact thing happened 1,000 years ago. So maybe people will ponder that for a little bit. Would people before Muhammad have gone to heaven or hell? Did I answer that question today already? Let me know in the live chat, because I forgot. I'll get back to it in a bit. What's your favorite Quran verse? Oh, I think I already answered that. Did I? I'm forgetting. I don't have a favorite Quran verse. I sometimes remember randomly a Quran verse that may or may not have to do anything with what I'm currently doing or thinking, because it was a lot of years of memorizing it. So it still occupies some space in my mind every now and then, but I don't actively remember it or try to remember it or have a favorite verse about it. I remember a lot of ridiculous verse when I was looking them up for videos, but I doubt that's what you're asking about. But okay, I'll give it an answer anyway. It's not my absolute favorite verse, but it's a silly verse about ليس على الأعمى حرج ولا على المريض حرج ولا على أنفسكم. There's no shame or there's no sin for a blind person or a sick person or yourself if you eat in your house or your family's house or whatever. Like, it was a very long, rambly verse that meant absolutely nothing and added no value to anything. And it's funny to me because, you hear a lot of claims about the Quran being linguistically beautiful and miraculous, and not a single letter in it is redundant. That whole verse was redundant and rambling. Anyway, Pampuvi says, I think you've intimated you have a partner. What do they think about your work? How much of a strain is it, if at all, to separate the public and private? That's been a problem. That's been a problem several times in my life, that even it might be self-inflicted in a way. Like, say I'm trying to meet people. I don't know what to tell them about this part of my life. Like, I don't know how soon to tell them. And for the longest time, it felt like I had to get to know them a little bit first before I trust them with such a thing. But it also felt simultaneously like I was ashamed of it or hiding it. Like, why am I not more open about it? Of course, I had my reasons that were not about shame or worry, but it started to feel that way anyway. So now I'm a bit more open about that side of my life with people that I trust won't harm me, of course. And if it causes friction, or if someone doesn't understand what is the point of what I'm doing, then they're not the right person for me. But more people than I expected to were not only understanding, but supportive, and actually like impressed by the effort. So it hasn't really been that much of a problem, thankfully. Debunk the Kalam cosmological argument. Well, that is... Oh, my cat's messing some stuff up. That is not a question. And also, I don't really care, like I've mentioned before, I don't really care much for the argument about the possibility or the about God or a God in general. What I care about is the claims that religions make about their specific gods. Doesn't matter to me, it doesn't make a difference in my life whether there has to have been a designer behind this existence or not? Because it still doesn't answer any questions. Like, is that designer, is it a computer simulation then? Or is it a designer who loves us, who created all this for a purpose? Or is it just bored? None of these are answered by the Kalam cosmological argument, so I don't care much for it, and yeah, I don't get into it very much. What specific life philosophies do you now find compelling or resonant? That's a very generic question. So I think I kind of touched on this earlier, describing what I find to be the meaning or purpose of my life. I used to think very negatively because of my religious indoctrination of the idea that if you live life to enjoy it, then you're a bad person or you're losing track of something more important. No, I think that living life for enjoyment is a very valid way to live life, as long as this enjoyment is not causing you harm. Again, like, I'm not telling everyone to go out and do harmful things that are enjoyable in the meantime. Yeah, I don't really have a very articulate answer for this right now. Didn't you feel bad emotionally or spiritually after leaving Islam? I don't know what spirituality means. Like, spiritually, did I leave bad? I think I felt bad after leaving Islam, but it wasn't any worse than I was already feeling. I mean, it was a different kind of bad. I felt relief in many ways because I felt bad for a long time, not being able to correlate reality with my description of reality from religion that I was supposed to believe. But then I had other struggles when I left the faith. Like, what's the purpose of life? Why am I here on earth? And thinking that if I don't have an answer, that science or whoever can give me a specific answer, then I am doomed and I am directionless. But with time, I realized that none of that is true. This relates to another question here that I think I want to answer at the same time. Yeah, okay. It's related to this question in a sense. If you could start a life over with the option to decide which religion you'd be born into, which one would you choose? None of them. And here's why. Because presumably at some point, if I am the same person somehow and I eventually realize that I don't believe in that religion or in the concept of a religion being from God in general, then my starting point is not a very good one, because what I feel like I missed out on is growing up from a young age with an understanding about the reality of the world that we know of, and maybe developing ways to think about the inevitability of the end of life. So if I'm always starting from a point of view of having some mystical, fantastical idea of what happens after life and that God is always caring for me and whatnot, when I then lose those beliefs, then I am left at, I don't know, my mid-20s or wherever, with that struggle of having to fill it with something else. But if I had grown with some healthy understanding of what life is as far as we know and how to cope with death and the afterlife, or the absence of an afterlife, it wouldn't be such a struggle to pivot somewhere in my life. So yeah, I wish I was born without a religion so I can learn all of these skills. Do you ever catch yourself having intrusive Muslim thoughts? Like, sometimes I think something mean and catch myself because that's not me. That's my dad. Somewhat. I think the one example that comes to mind most of the time is when I see a Muslim woman in a hijab, not wearing it in the way that I would think of a hijab. Like, the way that I understand the hijab, and hear me out here, I'm not telling women what to do with their bodies, but I'm giving you my inner thoughts, my intrusive inner thoughts. When I see a Muslim woman wearing a hijab, but it's kind of loose, or she's wearing makeup, or like she's wearing tight clothing or something, you always see a lot of comments saying, "Sister, please wear the hijab properly," or something like that. And I have that first initial reaction as well, because I am thinking, like, I'm concerned for her as a Muslim. I'm thinking, if you're not getting the concept of the hijab, the point of it is not just to cover your hair, but to hide yourself from people's eyes. And as a Muslim, so I would think that out of concern. I wouldn't go and say it to the person, but in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, poor woman, she's going to get so many sins and possibly tortured for this. So that's a knee-jerk reaction that I still have. I see a woman wearing a hijab in a certain way, and I'm like, she should probably wear the hijab properly. And then I remind myself, I don't believe that God's going to punish anyone for wearing the hijab a certain way. But it is still an intrusive thought that I have, because when those women who are not really restricted very much by the hijab or by Islam present the hijab as a very beautiful and empowering thing, that really gets on my nerves, because I hear all the stories of the women forced into it. And even when they're not forced into it, the emotional struggle that they've had because of wearing it and relying on it, or because of feeling inferior to men, or because of their self-image because of the hijab. It bothers me to see some, I don't know, like, I like to call them like a makeup tutorial hijabi say how the hijab has not hindered her life. Well, of course, like in your case, it doesn't seem to have, but in many people's cases it has. So I think that is my intrusive Muslim thought is, sister, please wear the hijab better. But I obviously don't tell anyone that, and I try to correct myself. How many years have you been an ex-Muslim? Do you remember what it was like to realize that you were, I've sort of touched on this question or answer for this question before. It's been many years now, but it was a gradual process. So it wasn't immediately that I realized I was ex-Muslim, and I didn't even know that there was a word for it. So I was in that in between for many years, till I came across people who are out completely, and even then I was kind of repulsed by the idea. Intrinsically, it felt dangerous to me to normalize leaving Islam. And then it took me a while to accept it, and eventually I did. So, I hope that answers that question. Do you think there's a different mentality between people who are raised and as atheists and people who become atheists later in life? I think there's a different mentality between everyone. But yes. One of my close friends is an atheist who's always been an atheist or irreligious, and the way that he thinks about it or doesn't even think about it most days is different than the way that I think about it. And it'll definitely occupy your mind in a different way if you're switching from one mode of thinking to another. So there's obviously going to be differences there. Let me see. Are there any questions from the chat that I haven't been taking? How do you react when Muslims around you try to make you understand Islam or claim that you left it because you didn't understand it or relate to it specifically, your bad and traumatic experience? It's really annoying, but I try not to be that annoyed by it anymore, because I've had that conversation plenty of times. You don't have to prove yourself to anyone. And maybe I feel this way now that I have more of a voice. But it was harder for me when I didn't have a YouTube channel, or I didn't express my opinions out loud, because I felt like if only they understood the truth, if only they understood that I genuinely don't believe, no matter what they're telling me here, that I know all of what they're telling me here, if only they knew that, then maybe they would start to accept ex-Muslims as a valid outcome of someone not believing in the religion or not being convinced of it. But it was just impossible to do on a personal level, and it was exhausting. So I've had that happen already on the channel here, where I have conversations with Muslims, and they're confused. How can you sound so reasonable and possibly knowledgeable about what I'm saying, and you sound like a nice guy? How come you're not a Muslim? It doesn't make sense to me. But slowly it sinks in, and some Muslims have admitted, I get where you're coming from. I don't think that you're doing this because you misunderstood or because you had a bad experience. Sure, it makes sense. So I'm trying to convey my thoughts in a way that hopefully Muslims will understand that. But on a personal level, just don't get involved in these conversations. If you don't feel like having the conversation anymore, just step away from it and let me talk to them on a live stream or something. But something that bothers me about that idea that like you only left because of trauma. For example, I see that a lot said people who have been, for example, assaulted by a member of the religious leadership and then it was covered up in whatever religion it is. And then the believers say, well, you only left because you were assaulted. So fucking what? Like, you think God is sitting up there and watching the person get assaulted or whatever traumatic experience they're going through, be it because of the religion as it was written or because of someone misusing the religion or whatever the hell it is. God is watching, doing nothing, testing the person, whatever it is. And then the person say, I don't like this. I don't like that the religion created the space for this. I don't like that the religion and its followers excuse this. And I don't like that this alleged God is not helping me in one way. I don't actually believe that there is a God, because if that God were to exist, then it's such a cruel God to be watching it happen in the name of his religion and do nothing to stop it. Not even a clarification on the verse that enabled it. You think God then would be entitled to torture that person because they didn't want to continue being in that religion? If God is truly like half as understanding as the average therapist, God would understand why people behave the way that they behave, and he wouldn't take it personally. God wouldn't think, I'm going to torture you for eternity because you're not kissing my butt the way I want you to, despite my religion and the followers of my religion harming you, and despite me doing nothing to stop it. So what if people left because they had a traumatic experience with a religion? Whose fault is that? It boggles my mind the way that some believers say it like it's a gotcha. Like, oh, you were just assaulted or you had a bad experience, that's why you left. That's not really helping your point in any way. That just means that you're unempathetic to it and all you care about is thinking that you're intellectually superior and that the person doesn't have as good logic and reasoning for leaving the religion, when we again have to remind believers, most of the time, if not all the time, religion heavily relies on emotion and emotional manipulation and fear. So to spin it as if one has to leave for intellectual reasons, but one can join for whatever reasons and one can cry about why they joined Islam is hypocritical. Just, make up your minds. Is it about logic or is it about faith? Is it about evidence or is it about blind faith? Yeah. Did you ever believe in ghosts as Muslim? Because as far as I know, Muslims are not allowed to believe in them. What are your thoughts on ghosts as an ex-Muslim now? Will you ever enter a haunted place or avoid it just in case? It was unclear when I was a Muslim whether or not I believe in ghosts specifically. Like, I knew of the notion of jinn and spirits of some sort, like unseen entities. And I knew of the notion that there's black magic and people who try to control these jinns or have deals with them. And the idea that you can say things to make them go away and all that kind of stuff. I didn't fully believe it, despite someone in my family struggling with what some people in my family thought was some, what's it called? Like jinn possession, and trying to, what's that thing called? Like the ruqya, trying to get that jinn out of them. Even then, I didn't believe any of that was real, but I had more of a fear of the dark and souls and ghosts and spirits and that kind of creepy, spooky stuff. I had more of that fear back then because I accepted that there's more to reality than what I can see, and that if the stories are to believe, then I had to believe them, that there do exist invisible entities around us. But now I don't believe any of that, and I don't think I would specifically go to a creepy place just to prove it, but I don't think that I would avoid a creepy place just because of jinn or spirits or something of the sort. Would people before Muhammad have gone to heaven or hell? So this is confusing, and I might include some links in the description after the stream, but Islam is a very confusing religion, so even Muslims cannot agree on this. There are hadiths about Muhammad saying that his own family members are in hell because they didn't join Islam, or they died not being a monotheist, they died a polytheist or something, even though they couldn't have known about Islam because he wasn't born yet, or he wasn't a prophet yet. So there's narrations about how people who lived in that region who spoke Arabic should have known, or the Arabs should have known about monotheism because of previous prophets, and they should have been a monotheist even though Muhammad hadn't arrived yet. So they would go to hell if they're polytheists. And then there's the opinion that they are considered Ahl al-Fatra, people of the period, in between religions or in between prophets. And those people will be tested in the afterlife. So they're not going to go to hell automatically. So it's very confusing, but the afterlife test is particularly hilarious and if not insidious. I thought it was a few questions about who's your God and what do you believe in, and in that case, how would someone answer those questions in the afterlife in any way except obviously your God, you resurrected me, it's obvious. But I heard of this narration, and I'll try to find a source for it, that God would ask people on the day of judgment, why didn't you follow me? Or why weren't you a Muslim or a monotheist? Some of them might give reasons like I had a disability, like I was blind, or I was intellectually disabled, so I couldn't understand and follow. So everyone would give an excuse, and then God would tell them, go to hell, like actually walk into hell. And the people who refuse and say, I had an excuse, why would you send me to hell? God would actually send them to hell. But the people who walk in without question, God would then send them to heaven. And it's such a effed up, like, psychological horror of a mess. Like, if you're trying to make your case to God and you genuinely think you don't deserve hell, but you walk in there obediently anyway, you're a good guy. Samana wa ata'na, just we hear, we obey, we don't think. But if you try to plead your case, you deserve hell. Anyway, the answer is, it's confusing. Not even Muslims know. Didn't you feel bad after... I think we already answered that. Planning to read the Quran, it's because of a Muslim girl I really like. Your thoughts / recommendations. I don't think you should ever convert for a person, man or woman. That's not a good life to live, and maybe you should look into the religion out of curiosity, out of interest. You want to read the Quran, please do. Just make sure that you don't just go to your partner for that kind of thing. So it might be a source of stress on any relationship to go to the partner for clarity on religious matters, because not only might you be distressing your partner by exposing them to some confusing things, but also any disagreements that you might have might start to strain the relationship when the disagreement is about a theological position or something else related to religion. So you want to explore it on your own and like find sources and people to discuss with. You should do that. I don't dissuade people from reading the Quran. In fact, I want people to read the Quran to realize that it's not as good as it's hyped up to be. So yeah, do it, I suppose. Just be careful not to do it for the wrong reasons or in the wrong way. Okay, here's a question from the chat. How would you feel about talking to people that are part of the LGBTQ plus and dated gay Muslims? Have you ever met any? Since it's been my experience, and I'm wondering if you would like to talk about it. Yeah, I'd be interested on any of the live streams where I'm taking callers, and if it fits the general topic of the day, you're more than welcome to. I've heard a lot of stories about people who have dated gay Muslims who kind of keep them in the dark and then suddenly sort of disappear and decide, you know what, I'm not gay anymore, or I can't be public about this. I can't actually own up to this. And some people who somehow find a small community that thinks it's okay to be gay, just don't get a partner. Or some people who do think that it's okay to get a partner, but they're very rare. So yeah, I don't know what I'm rambling about here. Sure, if you would like to join one of the live streams and talk about your experience, I'm curious to hear that. Okay, let's get back to the questions. We're almost done. I am surprised. We are flying through these questions. What's something good about Islam that you still like or apply in your life? I don't know if it's exclusively about Islam, but gratitude. So gratitude in Islam, you're always supposed to be grateful to God. And I think there might be some benefit in expressing gratitude in general, even if it's to an entity that may not exist, or if you feel like you're obligated to do it, you might still get some benefit from expressing gratitude. And if you leave religion or no longer believe in God in that way, it's not that you automatically become an ungrateful person, but you might not have an entity to direct your gratitude towards. And then you might just forget to have gratitude just because it's not standardized or mandated anymore, or encouraged. So I suppose having gratitude for the good things that you have, whether that gratitude be towards yourself for thriving and struggling to get those good things, or gratitude towards the universe or just existing, or gratitude towards your life. It doesn't have to be directed at an entity to take credit for it. It's just feeling good and thankful. So gratitude is what I would like to remind people of. Did you ever deal with any religious trauma after leaving Islam? And if so, how did you deal with it? Oh, plenty, including the fear of hell. And I have a whole video about this, how I got over my fear of hell. So check it out, look it up. I think I did a better job there of explaining that side of things than I could in an answer now. Similar question. What's your biggest struggle leaving? What did you do to overcome it? Is there anything you still struggle with? Again, ranking. I don't do very well with ranking, but one big struggle with leaving has always been family matters, of course. And it's something that I don't talk about often on this channel, about my own family situation, because if someday my identity gets exposed, I don't want any intimate information about my family to be known out in the public. So all I'm going to say is that it's not easy having a relationship with your family as someone who left the religion, and especially as someone who's vocal about leaving the religion. And yeah, thank you for the reminder. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're able to. Okay, what's the next question? Did you sometimes catch yourself thinking or doing something because of an automaticity of your former belief? What I said earlier about the hijabi thing, but also not anymore, but I used to still say Alhamdulillah after I sneeze, or like saying little words like that. But I don't find myself saying them that often. I maybe in conversation with other Muslims or Arabs, but not to the same extent. Do you ever taste bacon or other pork products after leaving Islam? Yes. So what happened was, years ago, I've accidentally tasted something with pork in it, and like threw it out when I was a Muslim. But at some point, I was not an ex-Muslim. I didn't know of that label. I was just very confused about where I am, and I didn't realize it was okay to not believe in Islam. But if I had known, I probably would have left Islam at the time. So I was still an ex-Muslim in denial, so to speak. And I remember coming across like a good deal on food that had pepperoni in it. And I thought to myself, what's the worst that will happen if I eat this? I mean, I've already had more blasphemous thoughts. I've sinned in ways that are way more major than eating food. If I eat this right now, am I proving something to myself? Am I overstepping a boundary that I know that I'm not supposed to? And I just ate it, and it was fine. I don't really like the taste of pork generally, so if it's masked by other things, I'll eat it. Bacon is nice, but I have no religious or spiritual or deep-seated negative feelings towards bacon anymore, or pork anymore. But I do find the taste sometimes to be a bit odd, and that's maybe because it's an acquired taste and I did not acquire it growing up. So, yeah. Do conversion stories make you uneasy? I haven't paid much attention to conversion stories. I feel a bit uneasy, I have to say, because like I said, I've spoken to a lot of ex-converts, and it's not always the case that they have a negative experience, but I feel bad for them because I know to some extent what might be coming their way. even just from the angle of them isolating from their family members who are not Muslim, who might even be openly against them joining the religion. They might feel very isolated. They might start to build ties with this new community who are, absolutely love bombing them when they first join the religion. And then when all of that noise calms down, they might find themselves even more lonely than before and more confused. And I feel sad knowing that that's a possibility for them. But I don't like to think about it too much because I don't know the person's future. I hope that if someday they're troubled by their conversion and they need help, they know where to seek it. I hope that, like the others who have reached out to me or have found my channel, I hope that if that's the person who's converting, if they need that, they can find it, hopefully. So it does make me a little bit uneasy, but not for the reason that I hate to see Islam growing in numbers and all that noise. No, it's just I know the reality of it. I know that this person is it's very likely going through a life struggle right now, and I hope that they're doing okay. Why is it so difficult for Muslims to leave Islam living in the same household as their parents? There's many ways to answer that. One is that sometimes it's very easy to spot that someone is no longer religious. So the stereotype is that someone leaves Islam and then wants to announce it to the world and get attention and be like, hey, everybody, look at me. I'm an ex-Muslim. You should praise me. But that's not really, almost always, that's not what it happens at all. It's people notice when you're not Muslim enough, or many people can notice when you're not Muslim enough. So even if you're not making a big fuss out of it, you might get called out. You might be not even called out for being an atheist or a non-religious person outright, but you might be scolded for not being a good enough Muslim. So one difficulty is always putting on an act like you're still a Muslim to some extent, or that you're a good Muslim like they expect you to, but secretly you don't believe in any of it. And then you feel, I mean, it's haram even to be a hypocrite. It's to be a munafiq in Islam, to pretend that you're Muslim when you're not. That is wrong. So it's very conflicting on many fronts. And another reason why it's difficult is sometimes we understand why our religious families would be upset, even if they're behaving in a very nice way and they're not threatening you. They're sad inside. They're scared for your safety. They think that it's like you're telling them that you drive around with no seatbelt, except it's even worse because the day of judgment is coming. A crash is not always coming, but the day of judgment to them is inevitable, and they're scared for your safety. So by the most charitable interpretations, it feels like you are telling your family members, I am about to go die. And it's heartbreaking. And I just wish that they could understand that their belief about the afterlife is nothing but a hypothesis. It's not real. It's not a reality that they need to mourn their loss of their family members. So there's many different reasons why it's difficult to leave Islam and live in the same household. It's seeing that struggle in your family's eyes is difficult. Similar question. How do you know if you should even tell your parents that you've become an apostate? Like I said earlier, what matters most is your well-being. So do what is best for you that retains your well-being and your mental health. So for many cases, you don't need to tell them, or you don't need to tell them right away before you've had your own support system and your own income and your own shelter. And in some cases, you'll just never tell them because they cannot live with that information. It's different for every person, is all I can say. But don't prioritize just telling them for the sake of telling them. Do what is best for you. How conservative are you in spite of Islam? Like some ex-Muslims can still be conservative. I don't know what conservative means. It entails a lot of things. I think I am. I don't think I'm that conservative. I think I'm open to new ideas and people living their lives in new ways. I am still cautious about the harm that a new idea might cause, but I am not against change in any way. I just have to inspect the idea before I adopt it or say that I'm okay with it. what aspects of Islamic tradition / culture do you still incorporate in your life? It would be charity giving. I mean, it was nice that it was kind of mandated, but not really monitored. And at least unless you're in a cult under Islam, a specific subset, most Sunni Muslims, like no one really keeps track of how much money you have or whether you've given zakah or not. I don't like that in Islam it was only restricted to giving, zakah specifically has to go to Muslims, but just giving charity. How do you view the fact that so many big ex-Muslims are anti-woke and very right-wing? A lot can be said about that, but I think it can be fairly simple to start to give an answer to that. When someone is a critic of Islam and they're popular enough, the amount of hate that they get is amplified. Like, I've heard the term, there is no hate like Christian love. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but also there is no hate like Muslim hate. Like it can be brutal, and that's not just against critics or apostates. It could be against other Muslims who are not behaving in a way that they approve of. And once you get mainstream, that hate can be amplified, and you'll see and hear the most horrific stuff that you've ever seen. And people would feel very justified about how they're behaving, and they have the numbers for it too. Like it's not just that you get weird DMs every now and then, it's campaigns of hate, and that changes people. When you see that this kind of hate is relentless as a public figure, and you see that the woke, leftists, whatever you want to call it, the people on the more tolerant, progressive side of the political spectrum are a bit too tolerant and progressive to your haters, or they dismiss those voices and they just don't want to associate them with Muslims or Islam in general, you can only find allyship at that large scale in the other side, which might be overreaching in their criticism, or they don't always have the right intentions, or they're not trying to communicate the same exact message that you started with, but at least it's someone who's on your side. At least it's some way to continue doing what you're doing with some kind of support. So I understand how some people get to that point. I don't want to ever be in that camp, but it seems almost inevitable to me that people who are trying to be tolerant and loving can be a little bit too blind to what they're endorsing without meaning to. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I see this comment often: the path from Islam to Christianity is atheism. You're on your way to Christianity. I really don't think so. I think that a lot of Christians seem to think that if only the person found out this or that about Christianity. No, a lot of the problems between that I had with Islam are also common with Christianity, and the concept of God sacrificing himself to save us from himself doesn't make sense to me. I really doubt that I would become a Christian someday. Let's see. We have maybe like 5 or 6 more questions. We're almost done. Okay. What do you think of David Wood's recent comments on atheists? I didn't know what this was about, so I looked up David Wood's channel, and apparently he made a video about the world's smartest atheists or something. And all I'm going to say is there might be a video about that next week. So stay tuned. Why don't you also platform stories of people of other faiths or no faith who were oppressed by Islamic ideology? Non-Muslim victim stories should also be heard, isn't it? I do. I mean, I have live streams where anyone can call, and if it fits the topic, then they can call and talk about it. And I've had people talk about their experience, negative experiences with Islam, even though they're not Muslims themselves. However, I feel uneasy just having a focus explicitly on call in and tell me how Islam has affected your life negatively, and that's my whole brand. That would feel like it would attract the wrong kind of attention, even if individually all the stories are true. So I try to be more balanced in the content that I make. Like, I try to give a variety of it so that I'm not dismissing anyone who was harmed by Islam or Muslims, but at the same time, I don't want it to just be a highlight reel of all the people who are harmed by Islam or Muslims, because it would skew the viewers' opinion and idea about the people I'm talking about, and it would bias them into thinking that every Muslim they meet is an example of the harm that we're talking about, and that's not the case. So I still do platform such people. It's just not a specific theme that I seek. What advice would you give to an ex-Muslim whose family is gaslighting them to come back to the deen, and that the source of information we are getting at is from the West and not true, etc.? I would advise you to stop having these discussions if you can. I know that most of the time it's your family who are having these discussions with you. If you can avoid these discussions, or even, it really depends on your situation. If you feel like it would be better for you to tell them firmly, if you keep talking to me about this, we will not be able to have a good relationship, and that might solve your issue. If you think that you can just lie to them and tell them, you know what, I kind of believe, but I'm not going to be a good Muslim, just leave me alone. If that helps your situation, that might be good to do. Just don't try to relentlessly argue back with them and be involved in this like attempt to, it's not even like you're trying to deconvert them, but it seems like to them there's no other solution except either you would join or they would leave. So try to get out of those conversations if you can, and don't feel like you owe them that discussion. Just look out for yourself first and foremost. Favorite Islamic absurdity? Please don't include my account details. Well, your account is not mentioned. Also, stay tuned, because I have a video coming up called Top 5, something about 5 Islamic, absurd Islamic beliefs. And I will comment even on the wording of absurd Islamic beliefs in that video, so stay tuned. 2 more questions. Are there specific challenges you faced in building connections with Muslims? Yes, one challenge is convincing them that I am not an evil or malicious person, and I am not trying to bully them, because I have other videos outside of my conversation with a Muslim that are satirical and critical of religious stories and religious figures. So for example, I have multiple videos that depict Muhammad, Ibrahim, and other prophets, and some of the stories that they went through. And none of these depictions are meant to show the characters as particularly ugly or particularly, there's nothing about their appearance that is meant to mock them at all. It is just using a figure telling a story, and I make it very clear what the actual story in the scripture was, but I also satirize that story and I add my own spin to it, not misleading anyone into thinking that this is exactly what the Quran said. Like, I've had jokes where I have like someone wearing a McDonald's uniform in the video. Clearly, the Quran never mentioned anything about that. But a lot of Muslims are expecting that if you don't respect their wishes to not draw the Prophet in any way or not satirize religion in any way, then you're doing so because you're a hateful person and you want to antagonize them and all that kind of stuff. But there are many Muslims who do know that I make that kind of content and understand why I make it, and it's not intended to antagonize them. And they know that in my conversation with them, I don't try to make them upset. So it's been a barrier, but it's one that I have crossed before, and I'm sure I will continue to. Last question. Very well-timed last question. Do you have any other jobs / how are you able to support yourself? So I've talked about this openly on the channel before. When I first started the channel, I had no intention of becoming a YouTuber. I just created the channel because I had appeared on another YouTube channel and on Friendly Ex-Muslims channel. And I just found myself being more and more involved in the community without meaning to. And then I found that there's a role for me to fill here. And I started making more videos, and I started doing more live streams and talking to a lot more Muslims and ex-Muslims and others. And it was taking such a toll on me that I realized I can't continue my full-time job and also do this. And I was at a point in my life when I was thinking, what is the purpose of my existence? Meaning, purpose, everything that I've touched on earlier. And I derive a lot of meaning and purpose from helping other people, especially in an underserved, if not completely ignored community like ours, with a struggle like ours. So I dedicated more of my time till I quit my full-time job and made this my full-time job. And ever since then, I've went through many stages of burnout because I've budgeted for this. Like, I saved up money and said, you know what, I'll give myself a year or two to do this and see how this goes, knowing that this does not pay well. But it's not even like I'm not even breaking even. I have to always spend my own savings to be able to continue working on this channel. Currently, my main source of income is this channel, like the ad revenue, Patreon, YouTube memberships, and other part-time work that I do. But I don't have a full-time, I don't give my full-time attention to anything except this channel. And I've tried to make it more interesting over the years. And recently I started a Discord server a few months ago, and it's growing so fast. We have about 100 members right now. And to become a member of that server, like I mentioned before, you just become a patron or YouTube member and you join. And the cool thing about the Discord server is it's about more than just me. Like, that's one thing about Patreon. When you become a patron, you get to see some extra stuff that I post behind the scenes, but it's still just Aladdin and Aladdin posting. But when you go to the Discord server, it's just everyone else interacting with each other. It's not just about me. So I thought it was extremely egotistical to start a Discord server till I actually did, and I realized this is amazing. It's not at all about me. So I urge you, if you would like to find that kind of community, become a member of our Discord server. Reach out to me on Discord if you need some help. It's Apostate Aladdin. And yeah, to answer your question, as of right now, I have jobs on the side, but this is my main job. And I'm very bad at asking for support, but I would like to remind you that if you would like to help me do this for longer, if you would like me to be a voice for ex-Muslims for a longer time, and if you'd like the community to continue to grow, please consider supporting my videos, as many others have already done, like these lovely folks. I want to thank them, and I want to thank you all for watching, for joining and participating. And special thanks goes to my patrons and YouTube members for making this happen. And as always, think critically and think for